Hi, I'm Emma. She read his messages and regretted it. Let's get into it. You know that feeling when the air leaves the room and suddenly the floor feels like it's tilting? It wasn't a sudden explosion. It wasn't a slam of a door or a scream that shattered the windows. It was the silence that came after I found the bank statement in the old manila envelope he said was for taxes, buried beneath a stack of old gym receipts in the bottom of his gym bag. I remember the exact texture of the paper, the way the ink had smeared slightly, the date on the transaction, and the name next to it, Sarah J. Investment Trust. It wasn't a gift. It was a six-figure transfer. $600,000, gone 3 months ago. My husband, the man I had built a house with, a life with, a future with, had drained our joint account to fund a second life, a second family, and a second chance with someone else, while I was home, terrified about our mortgage, wondering if I should take a second job just to cover the grocery bill. I remember standing in that hallway, the statement burning a hole in my hand, feeling a physical nausea roll through my chest so violent I had to lean against the wall to keep from collapsing. But this relationship didn't end in that single, devastating moment. It ended slowly, over time, in the quiet spaces between us, in the excuses we made for each other, and in the slow erosion of trust that I had mistaken for the natural aging of a long-term relationship. And to understand how we got here, to understand how a man I thought I knew could become a stranger so quickly, you need to know how it began. We met in the chaotic, coffee-stained environment of a local art gallery opening, a place where everyone pretended to understand abstract art but was mostly just looking for a way to get out of the drafty hallway. I was 24, fresh out of my first job, wearing a blazer that was slightly too big, holding a cheap plastic cup of wine, trying to blend in. He was 3 years older, a graphic designer with a reputation for being charming but elusive. His name was Elias. He didn't just talk, he listened with an intensity that made you feel like the only person on the planet. He had this way of making you feel seen, of validating every thought you had, even the ones you were too afraid to say out loud. We fell in love with a speed that felt like falling out of a plane without a parachute, and yet, we never felt like we were going to crash. For the first 2 years, it was the stuff of movies. There were Sunday mornings where we would cook pancakes in the dark, the only light coming from the kitchen window, talking about nothing and everything. There were late-night drives where we would play music so loud we couldn't hear ourselves think, laughing until our sides hurt, feeling invincible. I remember the day he proposed, standing on a cliff overlooking the ocean, with the wind whipping his hair across his face, telling me that he had never felt this safe with anyone before. He was my rock. He was the one who remembered my mother's birthday, who showed up when I was sick, who saved every single penny we had into a joint account labeled Future Home, with a sense of purpose that made me believe we could build anything. But looking back now, I see the cracks that were there from the beginning, the subtle fractures that I had convinced myself were just quirks of a complicated personality. I remember the first time he asked me not to look at his phone. It was 3 weeks into our dating, and I had reached over to check a text he'd received, and he pulled it away with a nervous smile, saying he just needed some private space to brainstorm ideas for work. I laughed it off, thinking it was just a bit of artistic need for privacy. Then there was the time he suddenly cut off contact with his best friend, Marcus, saying they had grown apart and that Marcus was toxic. I didn't question it because I thought he was evolving, shedding the old for the new. And then there was the money. He was always a bit secretive about his finances, claiming that the graphic design world was volatile, that he had to keep a low profile to avoid being targeted by competitors. I remember him asking to borrow $5,000 from my savings account for a business opportunity that would triple our money, but when he couldn't show me the projections, I just handed him the card, trusting him blindly. Those small things, the withdrawals, the secrets, the sudden shifts in his social circle, they were like tiny drops of water wearing down a stone, invisible until the structure was gone. The deterioration wasn't a sharp line, it was a slow slide into a fog that I couldn't see through. It started around the 2-year mark, the point where the honeymoon phase was supposed to wear off and reality should set in. Instead, reality seemed to set in for him, but I was the only one left in the real world. The argument stopped being about who did the dishes or where we should go on vacation, and started being about my need for reassurance, which he labeled as anxiety or insecurity. He began to withdraw, spending more nights at the studio, or working late, coming home with a look of exhaustion that felt like a rejection. I remember one specific Tuesday in November, 3 years in. I had lost my job. It was a disaster. I was sitting on the couch, crying, telling him I was terrified of being alone, of starting over. He was on the phone, his back turned to me, speaking in hushed tones. When I asked him what was wrong, he snapped, his voice sharp and cold, "Can't you see I'm on a client call? Stop being so dramatic." I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. I had never seen him like that. I tried to talk to him the next day, to explain that I was scared, that I needed him to hold me. He told me that I was too dependent, that I was making his life hard, that I needed to grow up and stop expecting him to be my therapist. I rationalized it. I told myself that everyone gets stressed, that he was just under pressure, that my need for connection was just a phase. I started making excuses for his absence. If he didn't answer the phone, it was because he was in a meeting. If he was cold, it was because he was tired. I remember one night, the night before our 2-year anniversary, I found a note in his pocket of a jacket he hadn't worn. It was just a date and a location, a fancy restaurant in the city center. I asked him about it, and he told me he had dinner with a client there. I believed him. I wanted to believe him. The hope was a drug. I convinced myself that if I was just patient, if I was just the perfect partner, the man I fell in love with would come back. But the distance grew. We stopped sleeping in the same bed. We stopped talking about our future. We started living like roommates who were terrified of saying the wrong thing. I remember the moment we almost ended it. It was a Friday night, and he came home at 2 a.m., drunk, smelling like a perfume that wasn't mine. I asked him where he had been. He looked at me, his eyes glassy, and said, "It doesn't matter. You don't get it anyway." I packed a bag. I walked to the door. I was ready to leave, ready to walk out and never look back. But then he grabbed my arm, pulled me back, and whispered, "Don't do this. I love you. I'm confused." He started crying, the tears streaming down his face, and I crumbled. I put the bag down. I forgave him. I told myself that he was struggling with work stress, that he was lost, that he needed me to be the anchor. But the anchor was the one holding him down, and he was trying to drown me. That was the last time I thought we were okay. That was the last time I thought I had a fighting chance. The rationalizations became my prison. I told myself that love meant enduring the unendurable, that sacrifice was the highest form of devotion. I ignored the red flags, the missed calls, the new passwords, the way he would flinch when his phone buzzed. I convinced myself that the silence between us was just a sign of a deep, mature bond, not the silence of a man who had built a whole other world without me. The truth about what happened, the actual betrayal, is a story that unfolds like a horror movie where the monster is the person you sleep next to. The affair with Sarah wasn't a fling, it was a calculated, years-long reconstruction of a life that didn't include me. Sarah was a former colleague from his early days, a woman he had reconnected with 2 years into our relationship. They had a history, a chemistry that he claimed he had suppressed for professional reasons. But what I didn't know until the bank statement was that they had been together in secret for 3 years, living a life that was as intense and consuming as our first year was. They weren't just meeting for coffee. They were planning. They were building a future. The betrayal wasn't just emotional, it was financial and total. Elias had been siphoning money from our account, claiming it was for business investments or taxes, but it was going into an account under Sarah's maiden name, a trust fund they were building together. I learned that they had bought a condo in the city, a place they called our place, a place where they spent weekends pretending we didn't exist. They had a dog, a golden retriever, which I had always wanted, and they had named it after a childhood memory of theirs. I learned that Elias had told Sarah he was going to divorce me, that he was just waiting for the right time, and that I was the obstacle to his happiness. The lie was a tapestry of half-truths woven so tightly that it felt like a solid wall. He told me he was working on a big project that required a loan. He told me he was stressed about the market. He told me he needed space to think about our future. All of it was a cover for the fact that he had already decided his future was with someone else. The unraveling happened because of a mistake, a small, human error. Elias had forgotten to delete a text message on his work phone, a phone he had left on the kitchen counter while he went to the bathroom. The text was from Sarah, asking if he was coming over that night for their anniversary dinner. I saw it. I didn't understand the full weight of it at first. I just saw the name and the words. Then I dug deeper. I found the bank statements. I found the emails. I found the photos of them on the balcony of their condo, the one I had never seen, the one that cost $600,000 of our savings. The confrontation was not a screaming match. It was a quiet, terrifying silence. I walked into the bedroom, placed the statement on the bed, and just looked at him. He was sitting on the edge, looking at his phone, and when he saw the paper, his face went white. He tried to explain, to say it was a mistake, to say it was just a phase, to say he loved me. He tried to say that Sarah was just a friend, that he didn't know what he was doing. I remember the words that came out of my mouth, the words that I thought would make it stop. How long? I asked. How long has this been happening? He said, 3 years. 3 years. While I was worrying about the mortgage, while I was crying over my job loss, while I was trying to fix us, he was building a life with someone else. He had been living a double life, a secret life, while I was living a life that was slowly being stolen from me. The anger didn't come immediately. It was a cold, hard realization that I had been a fool, that I had been blind to the most obvious truth in the world. The betrayal wasn't just the affair, it was the fact that he had lied to my face, every single day, for 3 years. He had stolen our future, our security, our trust, and our dignity, and he had done it with the calm, calculated precision of a man who thought he could get away with it. What happened after the discovery was a spiral into a chaos that felt like being in a hurricane. The first few days were a blur of denial and bargaining. Elias begged me to stay, to forgive him, to give him a chance to prove his love. He said he would cut contact with Sarah, he would return the money, he would do whatever it took. He cried, he pleaded, he promised me the world. But the damage was done. The trust was shattered into a million pieces that couldn't be glued back together. I told my sister, my oldest and dearest confidant, and she was supportive, but she also questioned my judgment. Why didn't you see it? She asked, and the question stung more than the betrayal itself. I told my mother, and she cried, but she also asked if I was sure he was the only one, if I was sure I wasn't being too harsh. Then there was the reaction of our mutual friends. Some sided with him, saying he was a good guy who made a mistake, that everyone makes mistakes, that I should be grateful he's willing to fight for us. They told me I was being too emotional, that I was overreacting, that I was destroying a good marriage over a temporary lapse in judgment. One friend, a woman I had known for a decade, told me directly that I was being selfish and that I should just get over it, because everyone knows men drift. It was the loneliest moment of my life. I was surrounded by people who were supposed to love me, but they were all telling me to stay, to ignore the reality, to pretend that the $600,000 didn't matter, that the 3 years of lies didn't matter. I felt like I was screaming into a void. The moment I realized it was truly over was when Elias tried to talk to Sarah again, even after I begged him not to. He told me he needed to clear the air, that he needed to tell her he was sorry, and that he thought they could still be friends. I watched him pick up his phone, and I knew, in that moment, that he was still in love with her. He wasn't fighting for me, he was fighting to keep the affair alive. I told him to leave. I told him to take his things and go. He packed a bag, and as he walked out the door, he looked back at me and said, "I didn't mean to hurt you." I told him, "You did. You hurt me more than you know. And now you have to live with that." I didn't try to stop him. I didn't beg him to stay. I just watched him walk away, and I felt a strange sense of peace. The spiral had ended. The chaos had stopped. The only thing left was the silence, and the quiet realization that I was finally free. Now, looking at this from both sides, it's impossible not to feel a complex mix of emotions. From my perspective, I was the victim of a calculated deception. I was the one who put in the work, who tried to make things work, who ignored the red flags because I loved him. I was the one who was left with the financial ruin, the emotional scar, and the shattered sense of self-worth. I was the one who had to pick up the pieces of a life that had been stolen from me. But from Elias's perspective, there is a story of a man who felt trapped, who felt like he had lost himself in a relationship that no longer felt right. He told me, in his moments of honesty, that he felt suffocated, that he felt like he was living a lie, and that he thought he could find happiness with Sarah. He justified his actions by saying he was looking for authenticity, that he felt like he had been compromising his true self for years. He told himself that he was a good man who made a bad choice, that he loved me but he loved her too, and that he couldn't choose between them. He didn't think the betrayal would destroy me, he thought he could manage it. He thought he could have it all. But the truth is, the betrayal wasn't just about love, it was about his inability to face the consequences of his actions. He didn't want to lose me, but he didn't want to give up Sarah either. He wanted to have his cake and eat it too, and he wanted to convince me that he could do it without hurting me. I missed the signs because I was blinded by my own love, by my own desire to believe in the best of him. I told myself that he was just going through a phase, that he was just confused, and that if I could just be patient enough, he would come back to me. But I see now that I was ignoring the truth because I didn't want to face it. I was in denial, just like he was. Both of us were guilty of something. I was guilty of ignoring the red flags, of rationalizing the bad behavior, of staying in a relationship that was slowly killing me. He was guilty of lying, of stealing, of betraying the most fundamental trust of a partnership. But the question is, who is more guilty? Is he purely evil, a man who chose another woman over his wife? Or is he just a man who made a terrible mistake and couldn't handle the pressure? Is he a monster, or is he just a flawed human being who failed? And on the other side, am I entirely blameless, or did I contribute to the breakdown by ignoring the warning signs, by staying too long, by refusing to see the reality? There is no easy answer. There is no clear-cut villain in this story. There is just two people who made choices that led to a devastating outcome, and the messy, complicated reality of human relationships where love and betrayal can exist in the same heart. So, guilty or not? Is Elias purely guilty, a man who betrayed his wife and stole their future? Or is the situation more complicated than it appears, where a man felt trapped and made a terrible choice? Is he the villain, or is he just a flawed human being? And on the other side, is the betrayed person entirely blameless, or did she contribute to the situation by ignoring the signs, by staying too long? There is no simple answer. There is no clear-cut verdict. There is just the reality of human relationships, where love and betrayal can exist in the same heart, where mistakes are made, and where the cost of those mistakes is paid by everyone involved. So, guilty or not? Love, lies, and hard choices. You decide. What do you think? Was Elias's betrayal justified by his feelings, or was it an unforgivable act of selfishness? Have you ever been in a situation where you had to choose between staying in a relationship and walking away from a betrayal? Or have you ever struggled to let go of a partner who made mistakes? I want to hear your stories, your thoughts, and your verdicts. Drop them in the comments below, because I want to know what you think. And if you're new here, welcome to Guilty or Not, Relationships. We dive deep into the most complex, painful, and human stories of love and betrayal. Next week, we're going to talk about a story about a couple who thought their marriage was perfect until one of them started a secret business that nearly bankrupted them. It's a story about trust, money, and the things we hide from the people we love. Make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss it. Thank you for listening, and remember, sometimes the hardest choice is the right one.